Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives through various ideas and current events. Today we're going to talk about Christian distortions, a little bit about Texas and the fight for freedom and politics. Is it war or is it about unity? So here's the opening question. What if the executive branch were to abandon Washington, D.C.? Let's just say Trump wins I think he's going to win the vote total, but let's just say he actually wins the White House.
By some miracle.
By some miracle, that's right. Not the vote total. I don't think that's a miracle. I think it's a miracle that they escaped the cheating. But did you happen to see Matt Taibbi's 2 articles on here's the fix that's in for 2024?
I heard about it. They've been working on it since
it's
2015.
An astounding article.
Yeah.
And he says there was leaked documents, and
fill it in. What do the leaked documents say?
Basically, the leaked documents point out the strategy of saying, here's what we have to do because if Trump were to win, here's all the things he could do.
Mm-hmm.
He could use the military against his adversaries. He could use stopping conversations online. He could use the intelligence services.
All the tools they've lined up against him.
All the tools they've been using since 2016.
Or since forever.
Yeah. So it was.
So what are they doing? What are they doing against him now? Or is it just saying they're scared?
Yeah, it's saying that and all the plans that how to respond to those things. So claim anyway. But here was somebody I read an article. I think this was Roger Kimball, PJ Media, writes the question that proposes that if Trump were to win, what can he really do? And you and I have talked about the fact that downsizing the administrative state is a great campaign promise. It would be virtually impossible to do. Very difficult, especially for somebody on the right to go, because they're just going to ignore him.
So you're saying if the president declared layoffs, they would just say no?
Layoffs is an interesting one. The one that's been proposed the most has been, put the Department of Education in Cincinnati, to fracture it and splinter it, so it's not a hotbed of collusion.
Well, the other side is just to cut their budget and say you're doing layoffs.
I know, but that takes the Congress to do that.
Well, you can, as the president, you can close down divisions because you're running the executive.
Yeah, I mean, Reagan did that. You have to be able to do it, and I don't know if you can pull it off.
Well, I think the challenge is one of public sentiment, because the story would be all these services, and this is how the federal institutions gain power. We're providing you services, you need us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the free
Society
school lunches.
Will collapse.
If you give away free school lunches for the poor, but then you give them to everybody, well, everybody gets used to it, and now what are we going to do?
Yeah, you can't.
I don't want to lose that free food.
He noted, Taibbi noted, commented on the phrase "our democracy," which I was glad he did. He spent a whole paragraph on it. Our democracy. It's not democracy for the nation now. It's the elite saying it's our democracy, which is not democracy. Yeah. Anyway, fracturing and sending to different places, I don't know if it's doable. Laying off might be good, but I don't know if it's accomplished, if you can actually pull it off without a coup, which they already had anyway. And then if you do other things, the media is against you. It's a nightmare. So
but the advantage of the media at this point, because it's so divided, right? So conservatives get media conservatives want, liberals that liberals want, and if the liberal media is angry, it's like points on our side now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
The hard part is when, and I've heard more and more voices, and I tend to agree with it, and we're going to talk about Texas in a bit, but the idea that Fox and CNN are two sides of the same institution. And so when Fox turns against the conservative, now you say, oh, who's gonna motivate the boomer base that still watches network television?
Yeah. And that's what's happening. Is the establishment side of things has been the 2016 through 2020 era showed that, and Fox was a part of that switch, so to speak, to the other side, but it was there all along. You just didn't know it.
So really the question is, because I think as this, my parents' generation, really, our parents' generation, as they fall out of power in the next 2 decades, what we'll also see is those network television, those news networks, 24-hour news networks fade away as well. But the result then, I think, is decentralization of power, but also decentralization of information. So there's no reliable way to say, I actually know what's going on.
I agree with that.
And maybe there never was.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe the Walter Cronkite era, because part of what all of that era required is a shared value system that we agree to telling the truth is more important.
Yeah, that's right.
And that seems to be what's completely lost.
I agree with that. I don't know if you noticed, the Los Angeles Times laid off a ton of people.
I heard about it. Yeah.
There are news media outlets that are laying off. Journalism is in trouble. Some are saying it's done, and I don't know about that. But what Roger Kimball proposed was, what if Trump, let's say he were to win, what if he did the executive branch from Mar-a-Lago?
Oh, he just decided not to go to the White House?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think about that? This is the opening question.
George W. Bush did something like that. They claim he had the most vacation days of all time, but he essentially set up a White House in Texas and just was at his ranch. So it's not unprecedented. To say I'm just not going, I think denigrates the concept of America's, the pomp and circumstance that is the presidency, which I think conservatives tend to want to preserve. And I know Trump understands marketing and putting himself the image of being president. I don't think he would easily give that up.
That's a good response. What I hear you saying is that what's missing in Kimball's proposal is the ceremony, the symbolism of White House, and how it supports presidential or executive power.
Yeah, if you were going to completely abandon the symbolism of patriotic America, you would essentially have to be abandoning what is America. You have to say America's dead, and so we're going to do it this other way.
That's a great point. Maybe it's not accomplishable then, because that's too much political power to let go of.
Too much, influence. Too much political capital, right?
Capital, yeah.
But I could see why Trump could do something like that, or any conservative, in the sense to say, this is how dead the deep state is. We have to abandon it. And
force them to come to the executive branch if they want to keep doing business, in a sense, and begins to diversify.
The thing I noticed the last time we were in D.C. for January 6th is just the sheer scale of these bureaucratic office buildings.
Yeah.
That they make the Capitol even seem small. Endless.
And along that same line, I don't know if you were struck with it. We never commented on it, but in the midst of the current round of the FBI basically persecuting the right, Congress, run by the right, or the House, okays the multi-hundred millions new office space, massive federal FBI buildings in D.C. It's like, you're just saying, don't do this to us, but here's a bunch of money to have what you want.
Yeah, the politicians are scared of the FBI.
Yeah.
All of them are. Because they've all, I mean, what is the saying? Madison Cawthorn, his story and how he got booted.
Yeah.
His claim was that there is a constant invitation for all members of Congress to go to these parties to get blackmail material on you, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to figure out what it is that your sexual desires or your proclivities are and then they're going to offer it to you.
Yeah.
And it's from day one and it's constant.
Yeah.
And so these guys have all got things on them, or they get forced out. If we can't control you, you are our enemy.
Yeah.
That's the mentality of a power struggler at every level, including the federal government.
Yeah. Well, if you're enjoying the conversation, make sure to click subscribe. You can get the notifications when the episodes come out. You can also leave a comment, review, share with a friend. Okay, let's talk about Texas for a bit here.
Yeah. Has there been any updates in the last week or so? I feel like it was in the news all over. And then
yesterday, Texas responded and added more razor wire.
Okay, so that's just basically where it's a standoff at this point.
Yeah.
I did see something that DeSantis was sending his National Guard over.
I saw that too.
Yeah, or
25 states.
somebody
signed.
said DeSantis made, because we were talking about last time about how the National Guard has the split obligation
Yes.
to the federal military and
Yes.
also to the state governors.
That's right.
So what DeSantis did is made a state guard. Have you heard of this?
No.
So he has a military, which is the Second Amendment speaks of the militias being controlled by the states. So he took the Second Amendment literally, established
And
his own military that's not beholden.
I've not heard this at all.
Yeah.
What do you mean he established?
A military grade
A
National
voluntary-
Guard, but it's a state at the state level and solely controlled by the governor.
No.
Yeah.
Seriously. I did not hear of this.
Isn't that crazy?
At all.
But it's exactly what the Second
It
Amendment's
is.
intention was. Not
I
only that
agree.
individuals would be able to carry guns in a way that would cause tyrants to fear the populace, but that each state could wage some kind of physical threat to a tyrannical federal government.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything more? Have you thought more about Texas? I think it's an interesting situation.
I've seen a couple different videos that are sort of like Instagram reels, just a guy with his phone talking about going down to that park, the Eagle Pass border, and showing that there's all these news cameras and then there's these smattering of National Guards and razor wires and people trying to get through. And then the guy will like drive by it from the outside of the park so you can see it all in the distance, and then just drive a half mile down the road and there's open gates on the border and no news, no guards. People can just walk through because it's actually just the whole thing is a show. And I thought that makes sense.
On what side?
On both sides.
On both sides.
Yeah. That, if Fox News and CNN are both sides of the same manipulative operation, well, maybe Governor Abbott and Joe Biden are too. That we got to stir up a panic this year. Every time there's an election. My
understanding though was that they were putting the razor wire across a place that was particularly not only access point but also dangerous.
Because they're crossing the river. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the geography. What I just saw was a couple different videos where there's just wide open gates on the border within a half mile of that park. So why wouldn't people just walk down there and go through?
Yeah.
To me, it just feels like political theater. It's sort of like when the Republicans talk about, even ones I follow who I respect, like, Mike Lee or these other guys. We're going to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, right, for failing to close the border. He's the Department of Homeland Security's secretary or whatever. Who cares? They impeached Trump twice. It didn't matter. And it doesn't matter. They're not going to remove him. They're not going to prosecute him with actual criminal charges. It's all just political theater for the election year.
I completely agree with you on that. Absolutely, 100%.
And Republicans play along.
Well, what I would say is the Republicans are instigating this in the sense that what he's done is impeachable. He's not upheld the law.
Yeah, it's criminal.
But it was impeachable last year.
That's right.
The year before. So the reality is they've held it off until an election year. And that makes me despise them.
It's the same thing they're doing to prosecute. Why did they prosecute Trump the year after he was out of office?
Yeah.
Oh, we had to collect evidence for 3 years? No, you didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just waited until he could run.
Did you see the clip about the guy who did an interview from the J6 committee and said it was all election scrambling, election theater?
Sure, yeah.
And that was an interesting thing. Okay, let me ask a question about Texas. You have any other thoughts about Supreme Court Texas defying what they don't like, accusations on the left? Because I've not seen anybody saying this. I expected the left to be saying, Texas, you're inconsistent. You say we should have the Supreme Court, but now it's one you don't like, and so you defy it.
I heard that a little bit, but no.
No, why is there not more of that? Why is that not being
what I've
shouted?
heard, and I don't know that I could check
the abortion argument.
But what I've heard is that the left doesn't even know what's happening. So my liberal friends don't know there's a standoff on the Texas border because that's not part of their narrative. Their narrative is we're under attack from Iran and we've got to protect Ukraine and global war. So the system is we get the liberals and the leftists afraid of World War III. We get the conservatives gearing up for civil war. But
so if I were to restate what you just said, another way to say it would be it's possible this is a competition for front page.
Yeah.
And because front page drives a political agenda, especially in an election year,
Mm-hmm.
and what you can push off the front page and what you can put on the front page. And Texas and the right would like to be on the front page the immigration crisis, the invasion.
Yeah.
And if it's not being pushed because of the media, then the liberal left doesn't even know what's happening.
Yeah. Which to me also probably means nothing is actually happening.
Yeah.
Abbott's posturing, Biden is powerless. Everybody knows both. It's just part of the theater.
That's very possible, yeah. I was going to ask you this. Do you think anything, you mentioned Matt Kalthus, or how did you say his name?
I don't know. Who you...
The guy who blew the whistle on the bribery stuff. He's saying you go to parties and there's cocaine everywhere. There's all.
Cawthorn.
Cawthorn.
Yeah.
Wheelchair bound.
Yep.
Greg Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
Wheelchair bound.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that until this week.
Right. Because you just see pictures of his face.
Yeah.
And he's talking to a camera.
It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that. And I didn't know that a lot of the country didn't know that FDR was wheelchair bound for a long time.
Right.
Because he staged everything and he learned how to walk with aids that looked like he wasn't using them.
Sure.
And it was all calculated appearance. But he had polio and couldn't walk.
Right.
Abbott, do you think that there's anything to the wheelchair being a part of Abbott?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Being a spearhead for this?
Oh, no. I just think Texas has the most, willing to have a standoff of any of the states.
They are belligerent. Is that a good word?
Sure.
In a positive way, sometimes belligerent. But...
I mean, you got to go across the border, right? So California's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Arizona is in its own, even its GOP is full of corruption.
Yep.
New Mexico's pretty liberal.
Yep.
Texas is all you got.
Yeah. That's a good point. There's the other point, though, that I was thinking about this, and then Ken Paxton undergoing the impeachment that failed. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The effort to get rid of an effective attorney general for the state of Texas, leading really other states in many respects.
Well, and I wonder how much is Ken Paxton, who's got a little mojo back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he actually the one causing this and forcing Abbott's hand to take a stand? Because you know where Abbott was last week, and he might still be there the whole time this was all going on.
Like in Europe or something.
He was in India.
Oh, India.
Trying to recruit more engineers to be migrant workers.
Yeah.
To come across to the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and then the lieutenant governor for Texas has been in the news quite a bit too over this matter.
I don't know who the lieutenant governor is.
Dan Patrick? Is it Dan Patrick? I think it's Dan Patrick. But anyway, well, what I was asking about the wheelchair and the Paxton's impeachment is the dynamic of getting back to my idea of over dinosaur power and under butterfly power.
Yep.
That there is a power in the world that God has revealed that is big and strong like dinosaurs, and we see that one. But there is a power that is transformative like butterflies, that is weak, that is involved with submission and the whole creation of woman and the roles of men and women. And then you get into just the cross is the explanation of that this is a power of resurrection to defeat an enemy, and you wouldn't think so. That looks like weakness. It looks like defeat, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was just thinking about it, is somebody like Greg Abbott and Paxton gets impeached, when these things happen to them, they have the appearance of defeat.
Mm-hmm.
They have the moment in which you can interpret it that way. And that's how we are inclined to interpret it. And yet it wasn't. And does this embolden them for additional layers of power? Is there the stream of underneath power that is flowing through them?
So that makes me think of the psychology of martyrdom, right? Because what you're saying is our allies see the injustice of our suffering and therefore admire us even further.
That's right.
Sure. And I think that's part of the power of the civil rights movement was to get in the news, right? To get those cameras pointed at them when the hoses and the dogs and the...
Yes, that's right. and it creates something in the human heart. So we're moving right now, and we've been I've eaten at Chick-fil-A a little more than normal, and we were in line the other day. It's the second time this happened. A big line happens. This one was at 2 in the afternoon, and there's one person taking orders up there, and they don't call another. There's all these other people around, and everybody's waiting in line for one, and they got 4 cash registers, right? And it's a little annoying. And I was talking to the person I was with, how it annoyed me the first time, but then I got up there, and they're so doggone nice that it defangs the annoyance I had, and maybe I would have said something, right?
Sure.
And I got up there, and this is what exactly I wasn't gonna. Because I was with other people, I wasn't really probably gonna say anything, but they were still, again, so nice, and I just got reflecting about that. It was an expression of power, even though it's not the kind we think of like dinosaurs,
Right.
because they took away, not, it's just a different kind of power, but it diffused me. It muted.
The dinosaur and the butterfly thing is always funny to me. Yeah. No, but it reminds me of the idea that I've heard a lot, growing up in my faith, trying to understand miracles. And that time and again, what people will say who've experienced these miracles of healing or other provision or, is that God shows up when we've tried everything we can do.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea that we fought in our strength, we used all of our resources, and at the end, when it's exhausted, now it's God's turn. Which is it? Is it 1 Corinthians where he says, "In my weakness, your power is made perfect." Right. And at first, I thought that meant it glorifies weakness, that I should not pursue strength. But it dawns on me that instead, if I'm not pushing my own strength to its limit, so that I can then trust God.
In a sense, that's.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. Paul says at one point in 2 Corinthians at the start, he goes, "We were this and this and this and this. This happened to us, and shipwrecked, and
and despaired even of life." Right?
Yes, we despaired of life, but we trusted in God who raises the dead.
Yeah.
What an interesting thing. I think he's expressing a real experience and feelings that they had. We thought we were going to die.
Yeah.
We really thought we were going to die. But we didn't think that we were done yet. It didn't make sense what God had called us to. And so we just trusted God that if we're going to die and we're not done, you'll raise us from the dead.
Yeah. Well, and that the world looks at death as like you're saying, as a failure, as a loss. And in the short term it is, but we have eyes to eternity.
Yeah.
So we know death has no sting.
Lewis said there's another magic at play. There's another magic at work. So, hey, the Trinity School, I popped in yesterday and saw you had a ton of kids here.
Yeah.
How many
and
kids?
My own boys were not even there.
I noticed that.
Yeah, we got 10 kids coming on the daily, and then a little bit extra on science. So some parents just want help with science, and they're doing other things. One of the things I'm looking at is, designating us as a tutoring service, and how does that work? There's some Christian churches out there that are organizing the students to be officially enrolled in like an online charter school, but then the charter school in Oregon will actually pay for tutors, and so the church is providing tutoring services as a means to establish or support tuition, and then they're tutoring the math, they're tutoring the content that the charter school provides, but then in addition, creating Christian content. And there's actually, I've seen it done a couple different ways, where the state's not going to pay for your Bible hour, but why won't it pay for the math? Because math is math,
right?
It's done well, and so it's fun to see people even in Oregon, Oregon is really liberal and becoming more and more totalitarian in its leftist views, but it still has that redneck hippie vibe from way back in the day, that kind of leave me alone laws.
I agree.
And our state's laws around homeschooling are actually some of the most flexible that I've heard about. So
interesting.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, a lot of kids coming here. If you're liking how we're talking, the Trinity School is something that Luke runs here. And you can find more information about it at gracestaten.com/Trinity School. All right. Talk to me about, did you ever read the book Emotional Intelligence?
No, is it a book?
Oh, it was a massive big seller.
Okay. I just hear the
IQ,
phrase all the time.
different kinds of intelligences, and and education has this, right?
Yeah.
They'll posit the different kinds and tactile and da 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 da.
Right.
But anyway, a lot of corporations for a while were doing emotional intelligence as a required reading as part of their training for leadership. And
so the multiple intelligences theory and the
yes.
Gardner's intelligence theory is the most commonly talked about in education. And that's the kinesthetic intelligence and the auditory and all these different ways of learning. For the most part, as science goes, it has no basis in actual science. It's mostly, I mean, even Gardner had no evidence for what he was proposing. He just had this idea that, and this is why teachers love it, because kids get scaled. They get rated by grades, by the system of who's smart and who's not. And in most cases, there's nothing a kid can do about it. You can't really make yourself more intelligent. You can improve your skills at reasoning. You can avoid logical fallacies, right? That sort of thing. But you can't really raise your IQ. So from that, this idea of EQ, which as a math science person annoys me massively. Because, for one, IQ stands for intelligence quotient. So then you're going to say emotional intelligence is EQ. It's emotional quotient. It doesn't even make sense. But I heard a comedian actually reflecting on this, and I thought it was pretty apropos. It was that claiming to be emotionally intelligent is almost always done by people who are controlled by their emotions. And in most ways, what it means is, when you're feeling bad, I feel bad too, as if that's intelligence, or as if that makes you better at handling emotions. But in most cases, what that means is someone is more controlled by their emotions, which isn't intelligent. Perhaps they're more aware when someone's feelings are hurt, but what they're really doing is saying emotional intelligence means putting emotions in charge, which is also a dysfunctional method for handling your emotions. And part of what I see as a pattern is a father's role, the vast majority of the time in a child's life, is to teach them to control their overwhelming emotions. And a mother's role, almost all the time, especially in early childhood, is to comfort overwhelming emotions. And comfort works when you're little, but there comes a time where you have to grow up and not be ruled by those negative feelings. And so in many ways, a father's role is teaching intelligence around the emotional sphere as much or more as a mother's role. And you need both. And so my problem with the whole EQ conversation is what it really boils down to is to say, when someone's feelings are hurt, they're in charge of the rules. And that is the worst thing a leader can do to try to promote the health of an organization.
I think that might be a development. That's not what the original book says at all. The original book is far more about the interaction between people. That is not just how smart you are, that you also have to deal with them as a person. You have to learn what makes them tick. You have to speak to their strengths. You have to, all these things that are relational.
Sure.
In terms of making things work if you're in a leadership position.
So what motivates different people? How do they see the world differently? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say too that there are a lot of people, and at times I've been one, who just wanting the truth or the right answer, it didn't make sense why anyone cares about anything else.
Yes,
right.
That's right.
Which is a form of ignorance.
Yeah.
Around what actually motivates people.
Yeah. It's not well-rounded.
Yeah. And I think, like a lot of these different sort of starts off with good intention and real skill, right? These concepts that grow in organizations and books, the resolution gets dialed down over time until it just becomes a manipulation tool.
I agree, because I didn't know where you were going to go with when I saw the note here. But one of the things I've noticed is the Trojan horse component in education of emotional learning. Is that what they call it? Social emotional learning as a way to put in the books something.
Well, and a lot of the gender ideology.
That's exactly what it is. That's what it's covered for. And it is.
But it's not just the gender question. That is the big fight.
No, it's not just. It's a whole host.
The race conversation, all of the victim narrative gets bottled up into that. That's what it is.
It's all those gets put under that social emotional learning. And the sad part to me is that, so I have a relative in education teaching, and they get a little annoyed with me when I mention this because I think their social emotional element in their school is not necessarily super corrupted.
Right.
So when I just bring up the fact that this is a Trojan horse across the board, it's generally true, but not always true.
Right.
And so in this one particular situation, it doesn't sound like that's what's happening right now, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, it has been corrupted. Something that is a decent idea. You have to deal with kids in their social environment and what their home life is doing to them. Some of them, they might not have had a meal. They might be caring for a sibling. They might, and they
Mm-hmm.
have all these things, and it does affect their learning.
Yeah.
And you have to interact with that. You can't just totally not, but also you can't become a nanny state.
Well, so here's the problem I see. That's true. You cannot. Teachers are constantly feeling the pressure to be the parents for
That's
kids.
exactly what's happening.
But it reminds me of when Nicole's cancer was first sort of fresh in the conversation of our lives and our friends.
Yeah.
And I sometimes would show up to church, and someone very well-meaning would come up, and it's this social environment. And at church, I'm usually managing something, organizing something, right? Kids' church or whatever. People would come up and say, "How are you?" in this really intense way. And it never, I had flashes of difficult emotion around the issue of my wife's cancer, but never in public, never. But I thought, if this was a hard thing for me, what an inappropriate moment.
It's the time
to try to draw out that level of intimacy. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Don't try to be intimate with people in a public space.
That's what the original EQ book was about.
Don't
Learning
make
those things.
Right. And so what I see is when teachers get into the narrative or get drawn into the narrative of kids, taking care of their siblings, or don't know where the meals are going to come from, or they don't have clean clothes, or the struggles, even abuse that some kids are suffering. When you make school about that, you're actually putting that kid in a emotional state that makes it harder for school to be just a place where I can go learn stuff. And I don't have to feel all the feelings. I don't have to focus on what's hard. But there's this therapeutic intimacy that teachers are learning or being trained to crave. That, I really want these kids to open up to me.
I know.
That is not helpful if you actually want to learn the curriculum.
Part of that, I would suspect, and I think you will probably end up agreeing with this, that the preponderance of women as teachers, because they are A, better at it in a positive way, B, worse at it in a negative way.
And it's a preponderance of, in elementary, it's almost all women, right?
Yeah. This caring, nurturing
middle school,
thing,
it's a mixture. High school, it's probably 50-50. Traditionally, I think you'd probably see more men teaching high school than maybe you do now.
And I think lots of the women high school teachers, they're tough ladies.
But that's true. But what I'm saying is, what I'm seeing is that the narrative of the feminine as more moral. The moral high ground is to a feminine perspective. And therefore, even the men are submitting to that frame, that mindset around what is good and bad. Because that's how they're being trained in the education schools.
Something of this is what's going to come up later. I want to talk about this because I want to talk about Adam and Eve in the fall and whatnot. But do you have a thought as to why the moral superiority is given to women?
Well, it's the empathy culture battle. Yeah. So I see the culture wars we've talked about as the battle of the sexes. And when you have a hyper-masculine culture, it focuses on honor. When you have a feminized culture, which is actually rare because it becomes so unstable, as we're seeing, a feminized culture rejects those institutions or dismantles within institutions the functionality of maintaining structure, because structure might get in the way of the emotional health, right? So if my church doctrine is causing you to have hurt feelings, well, let's change that doctrine.
That's exactly right.
Right? It's a relational priority that dismantles structure.
I agree with you on this, and what I think you're doing is pointing out a distortion that leads to that moral superiority assumption. And I completely agree with it. I also think there's something that's not a distortion, that is a part of reality, and that is that, and we've talked about this before, but the male sins are grosser and out there in your face more. And female sins are hidden and secretive. They're manipulative and on the inside more. And so I think that what happens is that, so violence. You've given me a face like I don't know what you're talking about.
No, well, I'm just
Uh,
thinking. The way
Violence
I
and
think about it
aggression
is,
and pornography and all these things that are a part of male are easily seen and perceived.
yeah.
But things of manipulation and excess emotion and different things that are in women, they're not as easily seen and they're not as,
So you're thinking of the middle school bully. If the middle school bully is a boy bullying another boy,
yes,
it's
that's
an
right. You
outward
see it
aggression.
and it's testosterone and there's going to be a bloody nose.
Now they might still hide it from the teacher,
Sure.
right? But when it happens, if they do see it, you're going to see it.
Yeah.
And
When
if a
girls
girl
do
is
it,
bullying another girl, it most often
oh
is
my
through
goodness.
reputation destruction and
All
gossip.
these
And
things, yes.
can you believe she wore that or
And
did that or all this?
and it's I think there's an equality of fallenness in them, but not of visibility.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think that lends because I think that I think as men then we know the elements of anger and violence that are in us. We know the elements of lust in our thoughts. And we know that even our wives don't really understand those things very much.
Mm.
And so we look at women ourselves, and what I notice in myself is I hold to this assumption that men and women are fallen equally, but I feel like women are better than men. I feel
Do
like they're
you?
less fallen than men. I know it's not true,
Right.
but I feel the weight of it
See what
because I see my own stuff going through me.
I feel like our culture has swallowed the narrative of feminine victimhood. And it's so ingrained in us, even as men raised in this culture, we feel the moral high ground. We've ceded it to them in a way that makes that difficult. But I feel like I'm beginning to see through it. I watched a clip
We'll have an
yesterday.
interesting discussion at the end here because that's kind of what I want to talk about.
Okay. I watched a discussion yesterday or a clip of a counselor, female counselor who works with married couples. And she said one of the things she's learned and was trained by her mentor was to never believe the initial story told by women about their marriage. You can never believe it. Because women in our culture, I think, have been trained to construct a victimization narrative. And they've been given all the tools because the therapeutic language is so ingrained in our cultural conversation that you can say, well, I was abused, I was neglected, he was a narcissist, he had these, even the disability or not the disabilities, but the mental health conditions of oppositional defiance disorder and all these, I have OCD and all these different phrases and statements come out. And it's so easy to craft the story of this man oppressed me. Mm-hmm. And it's an instant moral high ground in any environment in our culture.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. But I would say I do that, but I do it on both. I never believe either one. That's not a fair way to say it. That's a hyperbolic way to say it. I think that when I sit down and listen to a couple, I assume from the outset that they're both wrapped up in their own issue and they're missing things from the other side. Both of them are.
For sure.
She's missing things from him and her story has a distortion in it.
Right.
And that's part of the job is for her to see and understand his and vice versa.
But most counseling, most as a pattern, prefers the woman's story over the man's.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Anything else on emotional intelligence? Is that the point?
No, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just keep hearing that phrase get thrown around, and it always grinds my teeth a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to skip the next thing because it doesn't fit. I want to get into what we're having the other thing. Let me ask you this. Recommendations. What do you got here? You got something there? I'm excited.
All right,
I'm interested to hear about it.
I found a show.
All right.
I'm watching it.
I've never heard of it.
I'm watching it, and I can't think,
even though I have,
of a time I've enjoyed a show to this level. Like, I can't think of one.
Okay.
And I don't watch a lot of television shows.
Yeah.
It's called The Bear.
Okay.
It's the premise of the story is a dysfunctional family in Chicago.
Oh, I did see the promos for that.
And the older brother has died, and the younger brother he was a star chef, like highest Michelin star. He was running these restaurants at this really high level. Well, his family or his older brother who died, he had like a diner in the middle of Chicago and left the diner to his little brother. So this highly trained, chef is now going to take over this super dysfunctional and dirty little greasy spoon.
Mel's Diner.
And all the drama and the music and how it's like the most stressful show ever, and yet the most satisfying. I find myself just laughing aloud, watching the show. My boys came in and said, "What are you laughing at?"
Yeah.
But it's so ridiculous and so real. I just love it. So.
Okay, good. Well, that makes me think a thought about when you say that show. So now that you say that and describe it, I have seen the promos because we have a Hulu subscription right now.
Oh, there you go.
And but I almost go ahead.
Oh, I went and got a free trial just so I could watch this show.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I do is we get these things $2.99 for a year.
Oh,
$2.99 a month or $1.99.
The promo thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So we sign up for it and then we cancel it at the end. And if you wait a couple months, they offer it again.
Sure.
It's a Peacock does it. The Hulu
it's
does
no
it.
more cost to them whether you're on or off. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not like if they're making a magazine or a book.
But it's also why they're losing a ton of money because people, they don't have, it's not worth it to pay more money for a lot of people.
And they're running percentages. They know we'll get some percent that pay full price, some percent that sign up for the free trial and forget, right? All those things.
That's right. Anyway, well, when you're mentioning that, I thought to myself, oh, why wasn't I intrigued? Oh, here's why. There's two factors. Number one, if I see something is made in 2023, 2024, I start out with almost zero interest because I assume right off the bat it's going to be full of woke crap and I'm going to hate it. I won't even try it. I won't even look to see if I think I might be interested.
You know what's funny? And what's fun about this show, because they do talk about COVID a little bit, sort of is happening out in the aftermath of COVID. But there's no sign of COVID in the show, right? You're not seeing masks or anything. Yeah. But one of the things I really appreciate about it, and I think this is part of how real it is in the inner city experience versus especially Oregon, but rural Oregon even more, your race sets you apart. If you're not white in some areas of Oregon, you're going to really stand out. But one of the things that I use as a measure for whether a show is woke is if the most important thing about a character is that they're black, right? Or that they're this or that, then I'm not interested.
Yeah, I know.
Because that's not the most important thing about a real person who's black.
That's right.
And in this show, it's race is somewhat of an issue, just you feel it, but it's never the most important thing about anybody, which I appreciate a lot.
Yeah. That's the same. That reminds me of Abbott Elementary. Have you heard of that one?
I haven't watched it, but yeah.
Oh, so Melissa, their teachers talk about it because it's all about elementary kids, right?
Yeah.
And so we watched some of it, and it's funny. My wife laughs, but she's laughing because a teacher. This is what happens, right?
Yeah, it's so real.
But it's the same issue you just mentioned. It's woke in its hiring because it's it's Philadelphia, so it's not probably necessarily woke in that sense. But it's not an accident that it's like mostly black people in the show.
Sure.
But blackness is not what the show's about.
Right.
It's like, I appreciate that because I don't care. Tell me something about life, not your identity politics issues.
Well, and if the show reflects that, hey, the experience of being black in America isn't the same as being white. That's real, right? I want to see that. And I want to understand somebody's experience is different from mine.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of any minority. If you're not the majority in a community, you feel it in a way that others don't.
Yeah.
Almost all the statistics around what they talk about as white privilege is actually just majority privilege.
Yeah.
And it's consistent. If you go to China and you're any other race but Chinese, you are the vast minority and you feel all those same
Crazy Rich Asians.
No, I never did.
Yeah. I read the book and watched the movie. It was enjoyable, but same issue. That was the issue there. Yeah. They go to Hong Kong and now it's all just flipped over into a different.
Because that's how humans are.
I know it.
I saw somebody posted, it was like I don't know who it was.
In good and brokenness, both.
It was a black guy who just had a picture of his hand out and there was a Band-Aid on it that was the color of his skin. And he was talking about how meaningful it was to him that he found a Band-Aid his color. And I thought, because I remember all these diversity trainings as a teacher going through and how the Band-Aid was like this big thing of white privilege. And I thought, dude, it's just you're the minority.
Yeah.
If you're going to make a product, you need to have someone who's going to buy the product.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that it affects you so much, but goodness.
Yeah. All right, The Bear on Hulu. Now I'm gonna go look at it. Okay,
I,
let's do. Go ahead.
no, I recommend it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna. Let's do one thing on listener Q question comments, and then we'll do the last section here. We'll go back and talk about men and women a bit. Uh, Cancel culture. Okay, I've been thinking about the guy who left the remark for us. It was I thought you guys were something, and then
Yeah, it was clearly a Christian. I think he was a pastor,
I
right?
think he was a pastor. Yeah, I
Yep.
don't remember his name, and that's good because I don't really want to. But the point is, I was thinking about that, and it's no big deal to have a critique. I mean, in one sense, by the way, I got a nice compliment for what we're doing here. Somebody told me the other day, they said they listen to the podcast periodically, uh, and they said there's nobody doing what you guys are doing. I
Hmm.
said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, it's either an individual telling you all his thoughts,
Hmm.
or it's somebody with guests and asking the guest and
It's a
letting the
constant interview.
guest
Yeah.
and a constant interview. And then you have good ones and bad ones of both those. But like Joe Rogan is an example of that, and probably the most successful podcast, right, in
Yep.
America.
Hmm.
And he's very curious and interested,
Hmm.
but he's really taking the role of humility in asking other people, even if he
Right.
might not agree with them. He's just curious to what they're thinking and why,
Yeah.
and he gets to pick the subjects and the guests. Anyway, not either one of those, the man said, and that you both basically you have the overlap and agreement, but you have areas of disagree, and then you just talk about things as Christians for what's happening. And he said it's really enjoyed it. Anyway, it was a nice compliment.
Yeah, we got somebody actually posted it saying they appreciate how we disagree and that we can still walk together even though we do, which I
Oh,
thought was
nice.
nice.
Did you know the person?
Hmm.
That's nice too.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, so the person said, I thought, he listened. He was obviously interested in this same dynamic, probably this
Hmm.
pastor. And then he said he didn't like, well, he had the big long thing on VPs and presidents and not being, is very articulate.
I can read it for you.
Yeah.
He says, I've never heard so much philosophical garbage in my life. I thought
Yeah.
I'd found something good here, but I was so
Yes.
wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scripture out of context, the personification of the earth. Boomers are at fault for everything.
Yeah.
Boomers
Yeah.
won't let go. It's all about the boomers. Intellectually, your content is wafer thin.
Yeah. So,
So was it this being a pastor? Was that part of what bothered you about it?
no,
Okay. All
not at
right.
all.
Okay.
What bothered me is the big, on second thought, the big meta narrative of it.
Sure.
How easily it is to dismiss somebody, and it's a form. What he did by the language
Mm-hmm.
is cancellation. That's
Right.
cancel culture, is
Okay.
what he did.
Yeah.
I thought you were something, you're a nothing. Now, he doesn't know us at all.
Right.
Would he say that to any friend? Would he say that? Would somebody say that when you meet in a restaurant and you're talking to somebody and you find yourself intrigued by the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and then they say something you deeply disagree with? Whether because I think, for example, the Mother Earth thing, he didn't even hear what we were saying because neither of us believe in really a Mother Earth. But
Right.
there's something that God put seeds in the earth to bear. There is something feminine the way God talks about the earth.
Yeah.
And we were just trying to acknowledge we don't believe the distortion of Gaia,
Right.
but that doesn't undo that there's something,
Yeah.
right? To not be able to pick up that subtle distinction. Now, you're sitting there at Chick-fil-A, let's say, and you meet somebody in line, you chat, and you are intrigued by something they say, and you have this initial draw, and then they say something you disagree with. You don't say, well, I thought you were something, now you're nothing.
Yeah.
Turn around in line, I'll make my order, right?
But that is the part of the internet, right? There's a
It
little bit of
is.
these are the rules here.
But that was my point as I was thinking about it, how much the online narrative even makes us that are Christians think we can treat people that way. And
Sure.
that's unhealthy.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Online escalation. And so what I end up calling it as I was thinking about it, it's a spirit of rejection. That when you do this, you are using online tools to reject people.
Part of this, I ponder this a lot. I hear sometimes Christians really talking about unity and longing for it. And it is difficult to say, well, who's on our side and who's not. And you think you find an ally or someone who sees the world the way you do, and think, oh, finally I can connect with another person, right? He's one of us. And so then I can see, even if it's that guy or if it's someone like him, a sense of betrayal or loss, that like, oh, I thought I found an ally.
Yes.
And then there's a little bit of a vengeful, like a spiteful
Yes.
reaction
Yeah.
to that. But the other question is, how do we actually define allies?
I was just going to ask you.
And that friend-enemy distinction is really important. And we were talking about this in the sense of, who is it Jesus gave grace and patience to in their misunderstanding, like the woman at the well, versus who does he hold to such a high standard that even he would conceal the mysteries of the gospel from them with parables and say, no, it's a judgment upon them because they've rejected God in their hardness of heart.
Yeah.
And so when we just are assigning people as Pharisees loosely, we risk the judgment of God ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it might be that our own hearts are hardened.
That's right.
And so now we look with hardness of heart toward anyone who God might be bringing as a person to be ministered to, or that we might receive ministry from.
Don't you think part of it is when we have that, what we're experiencing is a moment of disillusionment. And what it reveals is we were looking for something more than probably we should have been.
I think also it's just a hostile world we're in now. And people are used to, especially I think the older Christians have lived in a world that growing up preferred Christianity.
That's true.
Maybe it became neutral in their views in the last 30 years, but now it's against us.
Yeah.
And you have to play differently in those environments.
Yeah.
And that transition can be hard for people.
I agree. Another word I wanted to note on that was the word abruptness. It was that little note was abrupt, and what I was taken by from that is the quickness of being able to. I thought you're something, boom, you're dead.
Right. He must have listened to quite a bit because the boomer conversation was later
at the end.
Yeah, so he got the whole episode, maybe.
So what is it about? There's something unhealthy to write off so quickly. What is that? The same element of anger? Because I would say, and I think you and I have talked about this, that there is a spirit of anger in our nation in the last few years. There's something spiritually taking place. There's some level. So the fact that we can't be civil across differences in our nation right now is a unique development.
Okay. It's recent.
It's more recent, and it's excessive in a way. There's always been arguing, and but there's something unique going on in this tribalism that has developed. Our news media and their news media, that's not new. I mean, that's not the way it's been. There's been more shared, and this abruptness seems to be a part of that same thing. Do you think?
Yeah, I do. I part of what I imagine. So, like the conversation about the earth. The personification of the earth. Part of what strikes me about that, and I hear this when I listen to Christians talk about the spirit world in general and some of the concepts around the Nephilim in particular, some of the esoteric aspects of the Bible even, is there's this reaction of, no, we have to be rational and reasonable.
Yes.
And so anything that feels beyond my rational explanation, I have to push it away.
Yes.
And say, this is questionable theology. Get it away from me.
That's exactly where I wanted to go with the comment. It reveals that a lot of there are many Christians. I think what Christians struggle with is there are mysteries in God and in faith and in our own commitments to faith. There are things we don't understand, and we don't like that. I would rather make it black and white and clear. And then if it doesn't fit in the black or white, I just push it out, and I don't want to deal with it because I'm left deeply uncomfortable with things I don't understand or don't know where to put them.
There's also and we might be reading into this guy's psychology a lot, but I think it displays a pattern, so it's worth discussing. And that is that in a stressful, a world of ideological conflict, you don't get as much time to stop and ponder the mysteries, right? We got to prioritize what we're doing here, guys. This is a fight. Are you with me or against me? And so I think all of that dynamic comes into it as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what that ends up doing is it creates entire swaths of Christians and ministries that their ministry is to communicate with a level of certainty about everything. that a lot of people say, I want to be a part of that.
People crave it.
They crave it.
Yeah, it's like it gives them confidence, right?
That's right.
In an
I remember a guy, a
unreliable
friend of
world.
mine back in California, left a church we were involved in, and they went. Their family had been Catholic, nominal Catholics. A bunch of these brothers got converted. They go to a church, but it asks them to work through things. And eventually one of the brothers goes back to the Catholic Church. He does so at a level of commitment that his family never had before, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But here's the reason he went back. He didn't have to struggle with difficult things, and they just told him what it was.
Okay.
And I remember thinking at the time, this is not a Catholic Protestant issue at this point. I'm just thinking about the ill health in not living with things that you don't know. It's okay.
Have I ever talked to you about the Trinitarian divide in the church?
Mm-mm.
How the church splits in the Trinitarian lines? So, I named my school the Trinity School on purpose, right? And I've been really fascinated with the idea of us being Trinitarian beings. But the church as a universal entity divides up in the same way that our brokenness displays by separating our heart from our mind, from our body, and we're not connected to the needs and the desires of each. The church does too. So the Catholic Church is like the physical body. It's very practical. It's very habitual. It's very focused, literally focused on body.
Rhythm oriented.
Like if you go to the Catholic Church, you're going to physically, you're going to stand up, you're going to sit down, you're going to repeat, right? It's habitual. It's physical movements. The cross has the physical body of Jesus on it. The centerpiece of the Mass is the body and the blood, right? The sacraments. And then also their service to God, their worship of God is practical needs. It's hospitals, it's orphanages, it's schools, things that the poor need, especially around the world. Okay, if you go to our wing of the church, it's very intellectual. It's systematic. It's missional. We gotta plant churches. We gotta send missionaries. These are all the functions of the Father in the Trinity. The function of the mind and the will in ourselves. And then I grew up right in the charismatic spirit side, where it's all about relational and creativity, right? And the Spirit hovering over the waters, and that every sermon, and I like to say the charismatics love the Bible probably more, if not as much, as the Baptists and the Reformed guys, but they love it like you would love your mother, right? They love it like you would love your wife, and they search the scriptures for a relational connection.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and so when you try to be systematic, they say, yeah, that's the mystery.
Yeah,
we're here to be loved, to love and be loved.
I think that's true.
And so the unity of the church, the possible, and so when you say he didn't want to sit in the mind, he wanted to go back to the familiar, the function of worship around the body, which is a real worship, but it's not complete. But in the same way, if you just worship with your mind, that's also incomplete.
Yeah.
You love the Lord with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, your whole self.
Yeah. Okay. Absalom,
and this is not a listener Q&A, but something I
put it in here anyways.
I put it in the wrong spot, but I heard okay. So Josh Howerton, and I don't know who he is exactly, but I saw this clip and I wanted to give him credit. He was talking about the role of Absalom with King David. So I'll tell the story for those not familiar. Absalom was David's son and was embittered by his sister's rape at the hands of his half-brother, right? And that David the king was so averse to conflict within the family, and I think probably as a reaction to Saul's vengeful obsession with conflict within his own family, trying to kill David when he was a younger man. He was so afraid of the conflict that he refused to face the rape and then Absalom murdering his half-brother as a vengeful response. Then he wouldn't deal with Absalom. That's so true. Absalom was sort of the consequence, I think, of David's fault as a leader. So he sits at the gate now, having grown up in this, and tells those people, David the king, he's old and he can't help you, but I'm here to help. Right. And so when people would come to the capital,
I do it this way.
Yeah. When people come to the capital, he's there to greet them and undermine the king's authority, promote himself as the problem solver. Okay. So what this author was saying, Josh Howerton, was we do this to God, that we stand at the gates of the church and say, yeah, God's he can't help you, but I'll help you. We take it on ourselves And I've noticed this pattern in the New Testament where Jesus, for example, might heal someone and teach in a town, then just leave. And I thought, you can't just leave. You've got to be there to fix all their problems, right? This is our responsibility as ministers, is to change the diapers and to care for the people whose marriages are on the rocks. And Jesus is literally saying, no, you go and give honor to Moses and go home. I have to go to the next town.
Mm-hmm.
And what Jesus was doing, and I think even if you see the apostles and how they would, Paul would plant a church and stay several years and try to establish leaders and then give them to God and leave.
Mm-hmm.
And how crazy is that idea, except that they were trusting God to do the work in the hearts of the believers too,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that we struggle to do, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that we struggle as parents to let our kids grow up and to give them responsibilities, including the opportunities to fail.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like to say is every time you remind your child of the thing they're responsible to do, you remove the opportunity for them to have been responsible,
Mm-hmm.
which includes the reality of the consequence when they are not responsible.
Yeah.
You're doing it for them, and therefore you're keeping them from ever actually growing up.
Yeah.
But we do that. There's this needy relationship that we sort of feel needed and important in church as leaders.
I think that's true. And then you throw wrinkles into it that just supplement what you're saying.
Yeah.
Pastors in particular have a great desire to be needed and to be helping.
There's an importance to it,
Which
was Absalom's motivation.
Yeah.
He was puffing himself up as a way to undermine the authority and the power of God.
I would say
of his
that
dad.
Absalom had an agenda in what he was doing. And there may be some with pastors, but I think it's very subversive in their hearts, and they don't realize the adulation.
It's a subconscious.
It's a subconscious desire to be praised and appreciated and needed.
Mm-hmm.
There is an element of codependency that pastors deeply struggle with as individuals, and they carry it into their ministerial efforts.
Yeah, is that what drives? Because I've been noticing more pastoral opportunities in my life in the last 6 months. And I feel that like these people need me. It's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll skip dinner and I'll,
Mm-hmm.
skip time with the family. And I've got to, why doesn't my wife understand how important this is?
Yep. That's where the rub gets. And the truth, because the thing is, the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes out looking for one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a legitimate thing to do.
Right.
But if it's always the thing you're doing, something's off.
Right. Yeah.
It's very difficult to find the balance and figure out what to do as an individual. And I've always appreciated when I've seen pastors who are able to fight that. But on the other hand, sometimes they fight it so well, they're really not shepherds.
Because they've isolated themselves into their family, protected their social circle so much.
I know my wife and I, when our kids were first entering into college and they're in this phase of leaving the house, so to speak, we would argue a bit and differ over how much to help them with the college, with applications, with the stuff doing it.
Yeah.
And what I noticed is that we both, I think, were disproportionate excessively. I wanted to back off and make them do it because I'm sitting here thinking they've got to learn how to do this. And if they want to ask for help, I'm more than happy. But if they don't, they need to face this.
Yeah.
But I think I did it too much too.
Yeah.
She wanted to go and hold their hand and do the whole thing for them.
Yeah.
Now they needed help, and it's hard to learn to ask for help. But I think she did it too much as well.
Right.
But we both kind of erred, right?
Sure.
And so hopefully.
No, I saw it was an article by a hiring manager of a big corporation noticing a trend and talking to other hiring managers. 25-year-olds showing up for interviews with their parents.
I've never heard of that.
or managers having their employees' parents call to excuse them for things.
Oh my
like, are we in
goodness.
high school right now? What is this?
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay. War. Let me go back one thing before finishing. Politics, war, or unity. I didn't do it at the beginning. The executive branch. I meant to turn that question into this question. Is politics war or is it unity?
Is it war or is it unity? that I don't know, but that immediately strikes me as a reminder of Lincoln, who claimed he was fighting a war to keep the Union together.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a war for unity.
Well, and there's these two great quotes. One is that politics is blood sport. It's
Yeah.
is that me or you? It's not.
Mhm.
Politics is blood sport. But then Tucker Carlson's recent thing in talking about politics is the substitute for war, so that you don't have to go and shed blood.
Sure. Right.
And it's like, oh, that's a great quote too. And so, but I got to thinking about this. Which one is it? Which one should we be? And I almost feel like what's happening here, and without us getting into the nationalism discussion, because that flows out of the unity side of our politics has broken down.
Hmm.
What if I said it that way? And so now everybody is feeling, and then what we end up differing about is to what degree that's good or bad. But we're feeling the war side.
Yeah. My thought with unity as a topic, and church I think applies to this too, but family even, is what are we united around? And with the family, you can see we're united around the identity of what it means to be in this family. And as long as we can agree on that, then the argument becomes, how do we achieve that? Right?
So if you bump that up to the national level, is that the problem? Is we don't
agree on what it
is
we don't agree
anymore,
on what we want America to be.
which is yes, that's been more recent.
So therefore, we can't fight for unity because we don't have something
Which
to unite
is why
around.
when I ask if the executive branch should abandon DC, that's a war effort, is what it is. That's not unity. That's why
right.
that's why I put that. I had forgotten I made that connection in my head, and I just was noticing how that also replicates what when we talk about what we should do as Christians.
Yeah.
We're talking about, well, if unity is gone because we agree on that, then at what level is war? And so I think what it reveals is that politics is fundamentally about unity, but it's the Lincoln thing. It's the warring when necessary to have unity, and now it's the awful decision of how much war.
Right. Yeah.
Because here's the thing about Sherman. He burned the South.
Right.
And helped stop the war.
Right.
He's the guy who said war is hell. He's the guy who went and burned Atlanta, burned the South, went through, devastated them.
Right.
In order to stop it is what he literally wrote.
Yeah, because otherwise it would have gone on forever.
And this is the atomic bomb thing too,
That's right?
Yeah. Dropping the bomb. I have a relative who's reading an Eisenhower book right now. Not Eisenhower, Truman. What's his name's biography on Truman? McCullough.
I have that. It's a really good.
It's exceptional, and but it's a never-ending question of that bomb. It's a tension point.
Sure.
Right? Because it's awful. You can argue both sides and feel a lot of goodness with your argument for the moment you're making it.
Yeah.
Either one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I didn't want to skip that, but okay, let's go to the last thing. You good with going to the last section here?
Yeah.
Here's the question I want: is Christian distortions, and we're going to get into feminism, victimhood comments. We're going to cover some grounds we already covered, or take it to that a little bit.
Sure.
I was thinking about this, about pictures of the fall, right? Your standard picture of the fall is some form of this picture. Eve is standing next to a tree.
Mm-hmm.
She either has a piece of fruit in her hand. Sometimes there's a bite out of it. Sometimes she's looking right at it, or the fruit is by her.
Okay.
There's a tree. There's usually a serpent coiled around, not seen instantly, but there he is in the tree. He's there, but there's a little concealment, right?
Yeah.
Which is fitting.
Yeah.
And then usually Adam is next to her. I was thinking about that as the most common picture of the fall, and was thinking, I think that's a distortion, and I'm going to defend it, and then you can push back, because there's another distortion on the other side, and that's feminism. But I think this is a distortion, a masculine distortion.
So you think the narrative or the pictograph of Adam and Eve in that way defends a masculine weakness? Is that what you're saying?
Nope. I think it is masculine dominance. It is a part of the consequence that. Oh, that's what you meant by weakness. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And it's a male distortion of the fall and putting more blame upon her than is appropriate. And here's my point. Right. When I was thinking about this, okay, so you have the Genesis narrative. She eats.
Yep.
And let me come back to the Genesis, because there's an interesting thing that I never have seen before. The second point is Paul in 1 Timothy says women be submissive, and there's an issue there about what that means in the context of its words in Genesis 1-3. But in that context of what he's saying, he makes this phrase, she was deceived.
Right.
So he put something on her.
Yeah.
Okay. But then Romans 12.
Okay.
In Adam we fell.
Yeah.
Death came through Adam.
Not through Eve.
I never thought of it before. He puts the fall of mankind on Adam.
Right.
And I have always in my mind had that picture and the idea that the fall, that Adam fell, I wasn't saying, you never say he didn't, but that it's initiated by Eve. There's something that she did. And it is true, but it's not all of the truth.
Well, so if Adam had not eaten, even if Eve had, it would not have been the fall.
Apparently, from a fall. Now, we
don't
know what it would have meant for humanity, and that's another question for another time. But yes, from a Romans 12, the fall of mankind would not have happened. So what that tells me then is that picture of the fall, maybe it's unfair to say this. Maybe the author would say it was just a picture of Genesis 3. Okay.
Yeah, it's the moment.
At the moment. But it's usually meant to say this is the fall of mankind.
Right.
And I was thinking that's not quite fair because that's only one side of telling it. And it's a true side, but the other side is that the fall, Adam is the one responsible for the fall, not Eve.
Yeah.
From another vantage point, right? So then I went back, and this is the last point to get your feedback on, is, here's what God says to Eve. Because you listened to the voice of the serpent, and you did this. So it's the doing this that was the wrong, but it was a listening to the voice. But to Adam, he says, because you listened to the voice of your wife.
Right.
And it actually doesn't even say that you ate, but that's the implication, I think. And I thought, that's
and deception is the key, right? So where did Adam receive this deception? From his wife.
Yes.
Where did his wife get it? From the serpent.
Yes. And so I was thinking, what that made me think of, this is the second point. The first point is the distortion. Is it a distortion in the picture? And should we be viewing the fall as an Adam and Eve together? She has a primary role in that she's deceived and takes. But he has a primary role that's put on him. The race falls because of him, not her. And should we say that more to avoid, because then I got to thinking those paintings, what they really are is, your desire shall be, whatever that means, but he shall rule over you. In a sense, those paintings are forming a narrative that's a little out of balance.
Yeah.
Or a little unfair.
I was doing an image search as you were talking, and I see, all these Renaissance paintings.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a mixture of Eve handing the fruit to Adam.
Yeah.
Or Eve taking it from the tree.
Yeah.
So the question I have then is, if you were going to make this better representative of Adam's fall, would it be the moment of Adam's bite? Do you know what I'm saying?
You know what? I think that would be insightfully clever.
Yeah.
To make you think, and maybe Eve is holding one with a bite out of it already.
Yeah.
Right? But it's down, and he's doing this. So the action is on him, but you see that she has been engaged. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, because I envision, when I think of this story, I always envision the serpent as a person. And I kind of play around it just in my mind's eye of what it means that that was a serpent, and a shimmering one and an angel of light, how that all kind of mixes. But I envisioned, Lucifer approaching Eve, eating an apple, in a conversation, just talking it, like, oh yeah, what's the big deal? Sort of portraying that, what are you so afraid of?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the distortion is one, and then the second thing is about I lost my train of thought.
Well, I would say there is a traditional view, and I hadn't heard it expressed much in America because I think of the influence of feminism, but there's a lot of old thinking around this is why husbands shouldn't listen to their wives. One of my first trips to Sierra Leone, in this group of pastors, they made the point, well, aren't women more evil? You were talking about this sense, men are more evil than women. They had the opposite sense completely.
Yeah.
And had the Bible to back it up.
Yes, right.
And what I see is the comparison. There's two moments in Genesis where wives should or shouldn't be listened to. So there's Eve, because you listen to your wife, speaking to Adam. But then there's also Abraham in a vision from God saying about Sarah, listen to your wife when she's in conflict with Hagar and Ishmael.
Yeah.
So,
which is interesting because Abraham's response to his wife in earlier settings were not necessarily healthy, and same with Isaac and Rachel.
Yeah, the whole story.
Yeah. But so because you listen to the voice of your wife, that's and then I was thinking about, it's the eating that was the disobedience, but the pathway of that was listening to this voice.
Right.
And then it's just interesting that, and of course we're two men talking about it, but so she listens to the voice of an evil one, is deceived. He listens to the voice of a beloved one, but so what it made me think about is that they had a masculine and a feminine form of their sin. And let's just do the masculine one first. He did listen to the voice of wife, and he wasn't supposed to in that instance.
Right.
He was supposed to exercise his rulership and his leadership in whatever healthy thing, that unfallen nature that is to be, and he didn't do it. He did the thing that we're talking about as being escalated today, of submitting themselves to the role of women for whatever set of reasons that are existing today. There's a set of them.
Yeah.
But he did that, and that was a part of the problem from the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And then on her side.
And on her side, she did it, but it's listening to another, it's a seductive voice. And I think it's feminine. So I'm actually nervous to say this, which is so funny because you have to be able to see the things that are masculine that have strengths, but they have their peculiar weakness. And feminine have strength but peculiar weakness. But our culture is tough, and men do dominate. But anyway, in the peculiar good and weakness of women is they're nurturing, trusting, caring. That means they believe too easily and they don't discern. They can be deceived in one sense more easily because those parts of their natures. That's why we had the conversation several weeks ago about marrying the bad boy, right? I can change him.
Right.
I understand him.
So is that something like marrying a serpent?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Interesting.
And so you listen to a voice, and yet at the same time, then your own wife, we talked about in another episode, the domestication in the positive way, they bring to the wildness of men. It's a good thing. They bring nurture and care even to us as male individuals.
Yeah,
that's a benefit.
I made the statement in that sermon a few weeks back, or months now. Civilization was built by men who want to build something comfortable and acceptable for their wives and children. And left to ourselves, we would happily live in a cave.
Yes, there is a truth to that, right?
I think so.
Yeah, anyway, so I was thinking about that picture of the fall, and the point I was going to make is Christian distortions. That was the point. Is that I think there's a little distortion there, but then I thought, but then to be fair, we live in an age, feminism in the West, let's call it, is a distortion itself.
Yeah.
Right? So just because you point out and say, that's not quite fair from painting Adam and Eve, it's not fair to flip and make the other distortion, right? And which you called feminine victimhood, because that's legitimate. That's a distortion also.
We had this conversation at school, actually, when we were reading Huck Finn, because both Huck and Tom personify this immature, adventure-seeking boy, right? And Tom Sawyer more, to the point where he's careless to a fault, but always relying on his cleverness to get himself out of scrapes.
Yeah.
Lying and such. But all the significant adults in their lives are women who are always trying to constrain them, put clean clothes on them, keep them, from using coarse words, get them to church, all of the domesticating impulses, and they resist them to a fault. But in each story, they then fall under the sway of a beautiful young woman and immediately began to domesticate themselves or to follow rules in a way to please her or to, gain her favor. I thought this is the story of as old as time, right?
That's right.
And in the end, Tom Sawyer sort of represents this roguish male who says, I won't be constrained. So in the end, he's always off to the next adventure.
Yeah. Have you read, that's Mark Twain, Sam Clemens. Did you read his thing on called Adam and Eve?
Mm-mm.
His little book. You should. You'd enjoy it. It's a retelling of the story of the creation of Eve, but it's from Adam's perspective, and so it assumes that there's time involved. So the thing I thought that was the most clever, Mark Twain, he's
pretty
Adam.
Clever. Yeah.
He's clever.
Yeah.
He's Adam, and he's obsessed with he's doing some things, and it's cool stuff. And he's thinking about it. And he's going about his day, and he's deeply satisfied, and he wakes up, and he's after this, and da-da-da. All of a sudden, he sees a flash in the trees. And then he looks, and there's this other creature there. And it's not an animal he's seen before, right? It's Eve, right? So what he does, he sneaks up to watch. And then he goes away. And he is, again, thinking he's clever. Well, unbeknownst to him, she's seen him a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he didn't even know. He thought she was hidden. So then she starts to talk to him, and he freaks out and runs away, right? And because, first of all, she talked, and he didn't know she could talk. Number two, then it made a response, he didn't know what he was going to say. Number three, he thought he had been secretive, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
And all this male-feminine thing is going on, right?
Yeah.
He runs away. Then, anyway, they start to engage, and it's this whole clever story about his bewilderment in her presence, and yet at one point he runs away, and I don't want to see her anymore. I don't want to be around her, but he can't.
Can't not.
He can't not.
It reminds me of being a teenager.
Yeah.
Or hanging out with teenagers.
It was so well done, so subtle and clever. But now that you mentioned that about Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, I thought, oh, how interesting, because I do think people are drawn towards different facets of the fall and what God made the world. And it makes me wonder if Sam Clemens is drawn towards the male and feminine, because even when you put in,
for sure,
all these women are his, you don't put that in a story unless it's something you either think about or it was your life.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And these are effects that you notice, and they become a part of the way you view the world in good things and also sad or disappointing things.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. What else you got?
Well, I'll throw in one more.
All right.
And it might be worth giving more time to later. We're at an hour and 20, so we could wrap any time.
All right.
But I'll tease one that I want to talk about next time. Let's say that. Okay. So I was listening to a retelling of the first meeting of the National Organization for Women in the 1800s. Yeah. This is the kind of beginning of what we think of as American feminism. And it began with a recitation of this call and response. This is what we're about. Okay. And it almost sounds spiritual as they describe it. So the call and response goes like this. The question is, why are we here?
Why are we here?
And the response, to make revolution.
To make revolution.
What kind of revolution? A cultural revolution. How do we make cultural revolution? By destroying the American family. How do we destroy the family? By destroying the American patriarch. How do we destroy the American patriarch? By taking away his power. How do we do that? By destroying monogamy. How do we destroy monogamy? By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, and homosexuality.
That's sad to hear.
It immediately made me think of a conflict I've been following between Andrew Tate and they call him the red pill, right? These guys who've rejected feminism, and how they're actually promoting this same stuff. They reject monogamy. They think polygamy and prostitution, and the Tate brothers made their monies prostituting girls on the internet, right?
That's the
and scheming. No. They admit it. I've listened to them talk about it. Scheming, manipulating wealthy men online to give money to these women who, in fact, they were the ones having the chats with these wealthy guys, claiming to be in love and that come and see you. I just need money. And what they're doing is the same thing, trying to destroy and promote the destruction of monogamy. And so what I see and is that you can say it's feminism, right? In the sense that it's this corrupted feminine view of society, but these hypermasculine guys are doing the same thing. And and they're two sides of the same degenerate coin, which is to tear down marriage at the centerpiece of society. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, well, let's add another thing to think about and talk again. I want to ask the question. I had a listener ask this question. When we talk about your desires shall be for your husband, but he will rule over you. This listener mentioned, is that only a Western interpretation, that the desire of women is to take his leadership role?
Oh,
because is other cultures, it doesn't seem that that is so, expressed.
Are you saying they don't see a pattern of feminine manipulation in other cultures?
Yes, it's different. So they were saying, is feminism a unique feature that has developed in the West, and therefore it has affected the interpretation of that phrase, your desire shall be for your husband, to be that it's a desire for power. Right. And their point of evidence would be, look around the world, that's not reflected everywhere. Oh. And so they mentioned in India, the women are not doing that in the same way. The Muslim cultures, there's a tight clamp upon women.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was an interesting question. I'd not heard the question before.
I think it'd be worth time. Yeah. I've got thoughts, and I've been a few places that I could reflect on.
Okay. Well, it's curious to me that I'm glad you brought up the now stuff. That's an interesting thing. But I just think a little kudos to you. Several episodes ago, the cultural battle is the feminist struggle, the battle of the sexes. You surprised me when you said that. I've not thought about it, but upon reflection, I just think it's accurate. And the more I think about it, the more I see the male and female elements of everything that happens. You look at it for what it is, but then you can also start to see these markedly masculine components to it and markedly feminine components to it.
Yeah.
And both for virtues and for vices.
And what I see is the message of the gospel applied into culture is to restore, to end that conflict. That it's not honor versus empathy. It's not masculine versus feminine.
Now, do you agree? Are you one of the people to erase that conflict? Because there are people who say they take the Galatians verse, there's neither male nor female, and say it's gone, egalitarian.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, the very next verse is wives to submit to husbands. So the very next section of Galatians. But I think what he's saying is equal in honor and esteem, equal in inheritance in the eyes of God, equal positions enthroned with Christ.
Yeah.
But society laid out is still functions.
And I'm thinking more and more along the lines that God made masculine and feminine to reflect emphasis of his different kinds of power. And so both of them are real power, and both of them are beauty and glory.
Yeah.
And the man has his ones that is strength oriented, and she has hers that is transformative from the inside out.
Yeah, and that's where Trinity, I think, and I was listening to a lecture where people were talking about the dangers of using the Trinity as a model for society and how relationships work in humans. But we are supposed to relate to people the way God does. It's really clear in Scripture. And so there is something to be learned. But the way I talk about it is that, we all are at home in different parts of ourselves. So if we have a spirit, some people are in that relational creative space, and that's where they hang out. They have a mind, but when they want to be most comforted and productive, they go to certain parts. Some people are very practical, and they want to go fix things and build things, and that's where they go. And so each of us reflect the Trinity in different ways. And I think men and women have a tendency toward different parts as a pattern, with exclusions and exceptions, of course. And so men tend toward the mind, and that's why the mind of God, the will of God comes from the Father. So we see these reflections as well. It talks, the Bible never refers to the Holy Spirit as a woman or a mother or anything of that. But it does say that the man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. This is a great mystery, for I'm speaking of Christ and the church. So Christ leaves the Father and the Spirit in some way such that he becomes this human person, this child. And that family dynamic is in the Trinity, and we see it in life as well.
Mother hen, though. I would gather you as a hen. So there are expressions.
But even that mother hen isn't being exclusive about the Holy Spirit. That's what
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
But God, I agree that the fullness of God will include the fullness of masculine and feminine.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so that's why when the church functions within that fullness of who God is and all of his giftings, we will see a place of honor for masculinity, a place of honor for femininity,
Yep.
that it will no longer be the battle of the sexes. And to the degree we see that in the church, we're living out the dysfunction of our society and not finding that fullness of the gospel and its healing.
You've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend, start a good conversation, and remember, dig a little deeper and think again. See you next time.